Okay, so the purpose of this video is to give you some key fundamentals and hopefully offer some useful insight when it comes to learning metal songs by ear or just songs in general. So if you're someone who usually hinges on, using tabs for learning songs and whatnot, it's a good way to sort of develop your ear and also just develop your critical listening skills. And while it is a bit more tedious, there is a much higher sense of self-satisfaction when you've learned a song by ear. So it definitely does have its own rewards. This video is going to be comprised of basically 5 techniques. We're going to look at song repetition and structuring, listening environment. We'll go over some EQ techniques, and we'll look at a mid-side EQ technique as well. Tuning deciphering, so working out what tuning a song is in. And we'll also look at the ever obvious slowing down the song. So let's get started. Okay, the first point I want to touch on is song repetition. So fairly self-explanatory, this one. Essentially understanding the importance of actually internalizing the song, recognizing any repeated sections, choruses, maybe a bridge and then another chorus at the end, which varies a little bit, or a different verse. The second verse is different than the first one. So for example, if a brand new song drops and let's say I'm wanting to get a cover out on YouTube like relatively quickly, pretty much the first half hour at least is just sitting down and listening to it on repeat. As monotonous or tedious as that may sound, it's pretty helpful with just working out exactly where this sort of song goes and the structuring of the song itself and whatnot. Also, another noteworthy mention is sometimes the song can actually sound more difficult than it actually is. So it might sound a little bit daunting, some of the riffs, but you'll find when you sit down and you actually get that first riff down and you get the feel for the song, you work out what key it's in or whatever, you find a lot of the riffs and song itself centers around that kind of riff idea. You'd be surprised, you learn one riff, and if that's the verse riff, for example, you'll find that might repeat, 2 or 3 times in the song, and the chorus might be similar to that, or it might just be chords or whatever it is. But before you know it, sort of the first half hour of sitting down, you've already got like a third of the song down almost. It's just a matter of filling in the gaps. So yeah, give it a crack. Anyway, on to our next point, which is, I've written it down. Okay, before you start riffing away at a song, you need to work out what tuning it is and if it's being played on a 6 or a 7 string or an 8 string. So probably the easiest way to go about that would be, at least in a metal context, is just listening out for the lowest note that's being played. And some songs can actually be a bit tricky and they'll sound like they're in higher tuning than they actually are. So a good example of that is the song Contraband by Make Them Suffer. And I remember when I was first sitting down listening to that song, starting to learn it for my cover, it sounded like it was just in drop B and sort of centered around that 4-2-0 kind of chord progression, that sort of. I mean, you sit down and you think, yep, those are the chords, it's in the same key, sounds right. But then when you come to the verse, it sort of becomes less intuitive with how you play it, and it didn't make sense, like the fingering and everything. When I sat down and actually slowed down the song and identified there was a lower note that was actually an A note, so like all of a sudden those same chords were now 2 frets up. Same key and everything, but more importantly, when you get to the verse, you get to do that hammer on. And that was the key there. That was the missing sort of puzzle piece, was that sort of hammer on, rather than that I thought it was in the drop B tuning. Actually, another example is Hypermania by Polaris, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. And I know they're playing drop B in pretty much all of their 6-string stuff, but listening to it, when it's sort of centered around, I thought maybe it's in like a standard tuning or a drop D tuning or something like that. But again, the giveaway was the low note that gets played in between some of the riffs. So like, so it's that leads off that little riff bit. So it is important to have a little bit of attention to detail to those sort of parts, because it's going to help you out tremendously in having that kind of light bulb moment in like, oh yeah, that's what tuning it's in. So I've got my trusty Jackson out. So quick disclaimer, I've already worked out the tuning of this song because I didn't realize I wasn't recording before. I actually have to go in Pro Tools and hit record here. Now I feel like I'm cheating, but I'll show you how I worked it out. So to expand on what I was saying earlier, essentially just looking for the lowest note. So in this particular passage, so right there. So the other telltale sign in that main sort of riff, in that little run there, There's an open third string being plucked there, which always just sticks out. Any of those sort of sections, you know, it's generally a dead giveaway that your lowest note is going to be what the tuning actually is. Also, this song does have a breakdown, so in the context of a metal song, another good tip is to look for the breakdown. You'll generally find some zeros, which, as you can hear, is B. Okay, so on to the next tip. Okay, so this next tip is relative to the listening environment, or in this case would be headphones. So basically, for the most part, when learning a song by ear, I'd pretty much just do away with the speakers altogether and just rely on a good set of flat response headphones or mixing headphones. Even the humble earbuds will do the trick. You just don't want anything overly bassy or anything like that. Those sort of headphones, while obviously great for casual listening, can make it difficult to actually make out the guitar riffs, which is what our primary focus is. But some mixes are especially dense and layered, and even with headphones, it can be pretty hard to make out the riffs. So there is a solution to that, which we'll check out now. Alrighty, so I'm at the computer now. Open up your DAW, and the song I'm going to be using is a good old Polaris banger. It's got some good riffs, and we're going to use it basically as our example piece. I'm going to chuck in this filter that I was talking about before, and I'll grab the guitar out in a sec and we'll have a crack at learning one of the riffs. But pretty much the first technique, super basic. Chuck in a low cut or a high pass filter. We're essentially just going to remove the low content of the mix and hopefully make some of the mid-range areas of the guitar a bit more prominent. Disobeying my one rule here. Okay, so headphones are on. We'll just play around with that and I'll show you what the difference is. So somewhere around there, just as an example, you're essentially just wanting to get rid of the sub content of the bass and whatnot. So going back to what I was talking about before with this mid-side business, in Pro Q, for example, it is down here. And essentially what we're looking to do, so when you look at a conventional mix, you're going to have your vocals, not necessarily in a chorus section, but in a verse section. They're going to be pretty central and they're going to be in the center of the mix. Whereas your guitars, for the most part, are going to be sort of panned left and right, double tracked. The idea here is that we're looking to filter out a lot of the the actual center part of a stereo field. We're looking to kind of filter that out or just remove the vocals in essence. So we're in the mid-side section, pull in a filter, similar as before, except over here, just engage the actual mid. So we're going to hit play and I'm just going to slowly introduce it. Let's go to a part which has some vocals. So you can see as you sort of bring the filter up in the bands there, the guitars and everything kind of maintain their volume and clarity-ish, but the vocals, for the most part, just become non-existent. So getting the overall phrasing and feel and everything of the song, this probably isn't the way that you'll do it. But if you're sort of having trouble hearing particular notes or chords or whatever, I think this is a decent way to do that. So that seems to be the kind of sweet spot where you can still make out the riff and the vocals aren't as prevalent. Whoopsies. So yeah, have a bit of a play around with that. It might be helpful, it might not, but I just figured I'd share it anyway. Now, another thing to look at is actually slowing down the song. This is actually my go-to method. In fact, I probably should have just led the video off with this, but it is the one that I reach for the most because, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You slow the song down and it makes it easier to hear the parts. So using that slowdown function is super handy, especially with guitar solos where there's lots of notes jumping around, but also in like a practicing aspect as well. So you can kind of sit down, work at it at slower speeds and build your way up. But don't go too slow. What I found, with bumping the speed down 25% or even 50% when you're trying to practice it, and you think you're doing yourself a favor by sort of, playing through the solo at a slower speed, but what you don't do is get the feel and the technique. If it's a fast run, for example, you're going to be holding your pick a different way as compared to how you would be holding it if you were actually doing the run. So, practicing slow is good for memorizing the notes, but if you do want to increase your ability and actually make steps towards improving at the song, pretty much just recommend just throwing yourself in the deep end. Maybe start at 75%, but just play along with it, bum notes and all, and just sort of hope for the best. So generally, a good place to start with a section like this is I just like to work out either the chords or at the very least just the root notes to get an idea. So now I've got an idea of the actual chords being used, we can kind of just fill in the gaps. So we've already worked out. I think there's a slide there. And the chord, so. Rather than confusing my ears and trying to work out the whole chord, I sort of listen, because your brain can only handle so many simultaneous notes at the same time. So if you listen to a song, you can only identify a finite amount of elements at the exact same time. Others you would have to focus on individually. So in this aspect for a chord, I'm gonna kind of focus on the more prominent notes and just piece it together. So the highest note.
One eternity later.
I mean, that's pretty much that riff down. Okay, so I might as well demonstrate learning another riff in the song. So yeah, pretty much in this exercise, slowing down the song is key. And a lot of this is based around that sort of 12, 7, 8. So sometimes speeding it back up to normal speed to get the context of the riff is helpful too. Otherwise, when you just go on each note in super slow-mo, it can get a bit confusing, but I got the gist of the... And it sounds like a slide. We're getting there. That's the first repetition, and I know it changes on the second one, but that's kind of the gist of it. Alright, so that's pretty much all I've got for you today. Hopefully that was somewhat useful and insightful. And just remember that using your ear, it is important. It obviously takes more effort than learning a song using tabs, but you know, you do get the benefit of developing your ear, attention to detail. And I mean, a lot of the time, the tabs that you do see are grossly inaccurate. Unless they're written by the bands themselves, they're often always wrong. So your best thing to do is just trust your own ear, but just sit down, listen to the song, and just remember, the more songs that you learn by ear, the better that you'll get at it too. It'll help develop your ear, your critical listening, and the whole process will just become a lot more sort of streamlined as well. So yeah, give it a crack if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.